Welcome to Supercool, the show about extraordinary solutions that cut carbon and improve modern life. Each week on Supercool, we go behind the headlines to pinpoint the stories and data accelerating the low-carbon economy in towns and cities across the U.S. and around the globe. I'm your host, Josh Dorfman. If you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to tap the follow button on the top of your screen to make sure you get all of our episodes. With the election just around the corner, we felt this would be a good moment to explore the progress that's been made over the past few years to accelerate the clean energy transition. Our guest this week to talk about it is David Turk, the Deputy Secretary at the U.S. Department of Energy. He's the number 2 official at DOE and was appointed by President Biden to the role after a remarkable career, where he's been Deputy Executive Director at the International Energy Agency in Paris, the Deputy Special Envoy for Climate Change at the U.S. State Department, and Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director at the U.S. National Security Council. He's also worked in the legislative branch, where he was Staff Director of the National Security Subcommittee of the House Oversight Committee. Basically, for those who have an interest in policy, international relations, and the clean energy race to a net zero energy future, David Turk has been in the rooms you'd want to be in. I'd certainly want to be in, and has helped lay the foundation for a new low-carbon economy whose benefits can be shared widely. That's the launching point for our conversation today. There were 3 questions I was seeking answers to. 1, are we better off today than we were 4 years ago in terms of our race to decarbonizing our economy and our society? 2, are the dollars flowing? Are investments really being made? Are communities across America benefiting and participating in this decarbonization effort? 3, does he know yet who he's voting for? And that one admittedly was a pretty short answer in the affirmative. But let's take number 1 for a minute. Are we better off today in terms of cutting carbon? Here's one way to think about it that Dave and I discuss. Our 100% net zero target in the US is by the year 2050. Our 50% reduction target is by the year 2030. So prior to the Biden administration, the US had been cutting carbon on a pace to achieve a 20% reduction by 2030. That's progress, but not nearly enough and not nearly commensurate with the challenge. Once the Biden administration took office and passed the Inflation Reduction Act, that trajectory changed dramatically. In the past 4 years, we're now on pace to cut carbon by 40% by 2030, getting us much closer to that 50% target. And again, that's in just 4 years. We've got 6 more years to get there, and we will, assuming, of course, that we stay the course. In other words, it's working in many behind-the-scenes ways. The work of this administration's legislation, the unprecedented investment dollars now flowing toward building the clean energy economy, are having an impact in communities across America. Which leads to question 2. Well, which communities? And the short answer is 900 of them. Projects across all 50 states are now financially supported by the U.S. Department of Energy to expedite the transition to a clean energy economy and ensure those benefits are widely enjoyed. There's a map which we'll link to in the show notes that captures all of them in one place, and we're talking about billions and billions of dollars. Here's just a few that jump out to me. One of the programs DOE runs is the $6 billion Industrials Demonstrations Program. It's really important because our industrial sector, stuff we make, accounts for 25% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. We're talking about steel, concrete, cement, glass, and aluminum. So this DOE program helps underwrite projects like retrofitting an iron and steel mill in Middletown, Ohio, with a hydrogen-ready electric melting furnace. Retrofitting one of the largest U.S. cement plants, which is located in Mitchell, Indiana, with an integrated carbon capture and storage solution. In this case, the carbon captured would be stored permanently below ground. And pursuing lower carbon clay-based cement alternatives in Port Deposit, Maryland, McIntyre, Georgia, and Elmendorf, Texas. Then there's the old whiskey distillery in Shelbyville, Kentucky, that's installing heat batteries and renewable energy to replace natural gas for producing all the heat needed during distillation. So you got Ohio, Indiana, Maryland, Georgia, Texas, and Kentucky. Then you've got a program like the Clean Energy Demonstration Program on current and former mines. That sounds like a mouthful, but here's what it means. Millions of dollars are flowing to the Wildcat Mine in Nicholas County, West Virginia, for a coal to solar conversion project. Essentially, decommissioned coal plants are now becoming the sites for enough solar to power 39,000 West Virginia homes. And funds are also flowing to establish workforce infrastructure for these programs, which is really the key. The dollars are great. Cutting carbon is obviously what we're talking about at Supercool, and it's absolutely consequential. But to make the clean energy transition stick, you've got to give people jobs. And we do see that today in towns across America. And you'll hear Deputy Secretary Turk talk about it a lot during this conversation. Because it's really hard to oppose an energy transition that employs you. And one thing we've seen in the past year is that the clean energy jobs are growing at twice the rate of conventional jobs. That's worth repeating. Clean energy jobs are growing at twice the rate, not just of other energy jobs, across the entire U.S. economy. The Deputy Secretary will talk about this as well. So as we head to the polls to cast our votes and continue to decide the fate of our nation and the world, here's a conversation to perhaps keep in mind when making your decision. And now, here's Deputy Secretary David Turk. Welcome to Supercool.
Thanks, Josh. It's just an absolute pleasure to be with you.
So to set the stage for this conversation, I want to talk about where we are with the Biden administration 4 years in to the work to drive this transition toward clean energy, decarbonization. And one of the things that I've heard you talk about is before the Biden administration, we're aiming for this 100% net zero goal by 2050, we were reducing emissions. If you're based on a 2005 benchmark, it was coming down by about 20%, right? The US was progressing, but things have shifted in a meaningful way since, over the last 4 years. And I'm hoping that you can shed some light on that and talk about what's gone on at a high level, and then we can jump in from there.
Yeah, happy to do it, Josh. And I just feel so proud to be part of, pick your adjective, historic, unprecedented, awesome, phenomenal, effort on climate change the last 4-year period of time, 3.5-year period of time. Coming into the Biden administration 4 years ago, we were reducing our emissions. We were on a trajectory to reduce emissions about 20% to 2030 off a 2005 baseline. Now that's going down, but that's not anywhere near the trajectory we need to be on in order to do our part to get to the net zero world science is telling us we need to avoid the kinds of hurricanes and wildfires, heats, droughts, what we saw in western North Carolina and other parts of the southeast, right? That is because we've got a lot more energy in the atmosphere, a lot more warmth in the Caribbean Sea and all of that. It really is historic what we did and what the president and the vice president got done on the legislative front. And policy makes a big difference. Federal policy, federal funding at the volumes we're talking about here, hundreds of billions of dollars of tax incentives, 10-year tax incentives all across the board. That makes a big difference. Our loan program now has, I think the latest I saw was $305.2 billion in the pipeline, just to give you a sense of volume of that particular mechanism. And we were given $100 billion, entrusted with $100 billion of grant money. 70 new grant programs, 70 new grant programs. We had to hire 1,000 new people just to fill the different offices. And if you add all that up, that gets us from a 20% trajectory of reductions of emissions to at least a 40% reduction just over what we've done over the last few-year period of time. So when people who are interested like yourself and focus on climate change and trying to make a difference in the world, it seems like such a daunting challenge, such a huge problem. We can make progress. Policy can make progress. These kinds of incentives have made an awful lot of progress. Now we've got momentum. We need to keep the momentum going, right? When you get momentum, the last thing you want to do is stall out.
When you say 40%, so we're tracking now 40%, is that toward, I know by 2030 to stay on track, we're talking about a 50% reduction baselined against 2005. Is that what you mean by 40%? Is it toward that?
That's right. It's 40% reduction from where our emissions were in 2005 to where they're projected to now get to by 2030, right? There's modeling and there's assumptions and there's more of a range instead of an exact number. But 40% from a number of credible modeling efforts is where our trajectory is heading because of this policy, because of the wind at the back of clean energy deployment, manufacturing across our country. So to go from a 20% trajectory to a 40% trajectory with a couple pieces of legislation, with everything else that we've done, but just in one term of one administration, it really shows how much elections have consequences, policy has consequences, leadership has consequences. And that's an awful lot of work by entrepreneurs, from companies, from governors, from local governments. It's not all the federal government, but having the federal government with the wind at the back for everything that we're trying to do in a country as innovative, as dynamic as our country is a huge, huge win. And it gives us leverage to work internationally too, right? Our emissions are only 13, 14% of global emissions. This gives us leverage to get everybody else to step up and do what they need to do as well. It's not where we need to be. The president rightfully said we need to get to at least 50 to 52% reduction by 2030, but 40% with 5-6 years left is a lot better than where we were headed just a few years ago. Again, when we got momentum, we need to lean in. We need to do even more to get to at least that 50% by 2030, and then have a credible pathway to get to net zero by 2050, which is the other very ambitious goal the president and the vice president had put on the table.
Yeah, here's what strikes me about that, and why I just wanted to focus on it for a minute. I remember in 2018 when the UN IPCC came out with a report that said we have until 2030 to hit 50% reduction if we want to stay below 1.5 degree rise in temperatures. Now there's questions of have we blown past 1.5 degrees Celsius, or where are we in that? But still, I remember that moment in 2018, and a friend of mine, Andrew Jones, and Auden Chandler published an op-ed in the New York Times the day after that report came out. And it was like, so all these people who were steeped in climate were like essentially panicked, right? They were like, we're gonna have to change everything. Like, everything now changes. And okay, fast forward 6 years, and life as we know it hasn't really changed, right? In some way, it's gotten more efficient, hopefully, but we're still living largely the same way we did 6 years ago, yet this trajectory, because of what you mentioned, the innovation and a lot of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, is actually having an effect and an impact. And I think that's really important to understand, and we'll dive into what that looks like and how the role the DOE is playing. But I just find that a remarkable statistic, given that moment 6 years ago. It was like, oh my God, what are we possibly going to do?
Well, I think two things can be true and are true. One is getting to net zero by 2050 is incredibly ambitious, right? It's not just net zero in electricity, where we've made most of our progress in terms of decarbonizing. That's where most of our emission reductions in the U.S. have come from. It's transportation, it's industry, it's buildings, it's all across the board, right? Everything that uses energy and all the process emissions as well. And to do that by 2050, which is now only 26, 25 years from now, right? That is a daunting proposition. There is no doubt about that. But what's also true is our country and the world is incredibly innovative. And sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit that we can step up. But policy really makes a difference, right? To have a 30% tax credit for anyone who wants to put solar on their roof, to have $7,500 as a tax write-off if you buy an EV, right? That's a powerful incentive, and that's just a few examples of a whole number of examples. We've got billions of dollars in decarbonizing industry with all these demonstration grant programs. We've got grant programs that are focused on hydrogen and building out our clean hydrogen economy. We've got grant programs across affordable housing. We've got grant programs trying to bring these clean energy technologies to low-income communities and make sure everyone benefits from this. And in the end, it can be a win-win-win. The president has talked about this. The vice president has talked about this. If we can get the same level of services or even more level of services, do it in a cleaner way, not just from our greenhouse gas emissions, but from local pollution as well, that's a huge win. If we can do it in a way that makes sure everyone benefits from it, and it's not just the wealthiest who take advantage of all these clean energy technologies, but those who deserve it the most, frankly, and need it the most, this is where we got money for rebates so that low-income folks can benefit from insulation, from heat pumps, from solar PV as well. Like, when you have policy It all works behind the scene. Most people aren't thinking about it. Most people aren't even aware of it. But all of a sudden, you make really tangible, dramatic progress in ways that lives are actually improved, and we actually avoid the worst consequences of climate change. But we just need to keep at it.
Okay. So let's dig into some of the things you talked about and put some kind of color and context. As I was just getting ready to have the opportunity to speak with you and going through the number of programs, and so we'll touch on as many of these as we can get to: the industrial demonstration program, the clean energy demonstration program on current and former mine land program, which I think is really interesting, energy improvements in rural and remote area program, battery manufacturing and recycling grants, grid resilience and innovation partnerships. And I'm going down the list of all these projects, and I'm about 2/3 in. I'm like, okay, gosh, I got to write my notes. It's grid resilience and innovation partnerships program time. And I'm just like, my head's spinning with the number of communities that are being touched and impacted and being funded to work on these types of programs. And so maybe we can just jump in with and some specifics so people know, Dave, when you're talking about it, like the industrial demonstrations program. We know industrial emissions are about a quarter today of greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S., right? Huge impact. But what does this mean for the U.S. DOE? What are some of the kinds of projects that you all help underwrite and get off the ground?
Let me give you some big picture numbers about the scale of what we're doing. One of the most striking visuals that we use, the Secretary uses, I use, others at the department use, is a map showing 900 new and expanded manufacturing facilities, clean energy manufacturing facilities, that are getting, in some cases, they're a greenfield. In some cases, they're using existing sites, including old coal power plants, and repurposing those for clean energy, either the production of clean energy or the manufacturing of clean energy. 900 of those new and expanded manufacturing facilities all across the country. Just the volume of it is immense, right? And again, that's what you can do with policy. That's what you can do when you have tax credits, you have loans, you have grants, you have smart people who are hired to administer these programs going forward. And what's been truly even more impressive than the sheer volume of it is to actually go out and visit these communities, right? And to see what this means for not only the mayors and the local community leaders, but the union workers and others who are going to benefit from the fact that they have that job. And it's not just a job for the next year or two. This is competitiveness for the long haul, right? When you build clean energy, we're going to need more and more clean energy. We're going to need more and more solar and wind and storage and enhanced geothermal and grids and transmissions. This is a stable job environment, a growing job environment, and a boom for these communities. And what's great about visiting a lot of these communities, I was in North Carolina not too long ago. I was in my own home state of Illinois just last week for some funding that went out to Rockford, Illinois. What's great is it's completely depoliticized. Like, I have no idea if the mayors I'm meeting with are Republican or Democrat. They're just looking at this as jobs and competitiveness and having their community be better positioned into the future from an economic perspective. And it's just incredibly fulfilling. I feel incredibly humbled by having this position and helping to work with the phenomenal team making all this work and happen. But it's just so great to see the eyes. I remember I was in Phoenix, Arizona, and Phoenix has done quite well, and Arizona has done quite well. They've got a lot of clean energy manufacturing that's already in their state and coming to their state even more so. And I remember meeting with a guy, I think he was maybe upper 20s, and a union guy. He was going through an apprenticeship program. And he basically admitted he was sort of floundering in his life, right? Like, he didn't know what he wanted to do. And then he had a kid. And he was like, holy crap, like, I got to get my life together. And like, he happened because his uncle was a union member and was in the trades, and he got hooked up on this, and now he's got an incredibly bright future. He's got a paycheck, he's got a job that can support him and his family for the medium and long haul. And just to see that pride in his face. And when I talked to him about the clean energy part, I'm not sure he got into this line of work because of the clean energy part. More for him, it was just a good, stable job. But the fact that he's like doing something good for the environment that his kid and his kid's kid, whenever his kid has kids, like, benefits from, like, it was incredibly fulfilling. And I've seen that again and again and again. And that is the human element of this, I don't think can be overstated.
I think one of the things that I wrestle with a lot when you talk about this clean energy transition and the conversation turns to jobs and we say, well, we're going to create thousands and thousands of jobs. It all sounds very theoretical. It sounds pie in the sky. And it's hard to even know what it means, because I think for most Americans, certainly for me, if someone says, well, we're creating 100,000 jobs, 200,000, 500, is that a lot? I don't really know. But I think when you can talk about communities where in this specific place, there is a factory now where this, these people, these 200 people who live there, like this is now meaningful to them, that has a lot of resonance. And when I was just scanning this list and looking at some of these projects, like you mentioned, Middleton, Ohio, or Perry County, Mississippi, and Montpelier, Iowa, which is a hydrogen-fueled zero-emission steelmaking, or that's what they're moving toward or getting ready for, or Mitchell, Indiana, or Port Deposit. I mean, this is everywhere America, right? This is an American story of some reshoring or building up our manufacturing base again through this transition. These communities, these jobs. Is that a big motivator for you and your team and how you think about the work that you're accomplishing?
So it's absolutely a huge motivator for me personally, and I think for all of us working on this. And I know it's a motivator for the president, right? Scranton Joe, coming from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and our vice president coming from a very middle-class background as well. So I grew up in the what people unfortunately call the Rust Belt, right? I grew up in a small town in Illinois, a big steel mill community. And when I was growing up back in the 80s, basically the steel mill was shutting down in successive waves over a period of time. So I saw what it meant for a community to shed jobs, to be going in the opposite direction. And my perception as a kid was there was no federal program. There was no efforts to try to think through, okay, what is going to be the future for Rock Falls, Illinois? That's my hometown that I grew up in. So to me, it's so rewarding going to, like you said, communities literally all across the country, whether it's Kentucky or Utah or California or Alaska or Florida or wherever, and be able to show up. And we've got some grant money or loan money that's leveraging a whole bunch of private investment, right? All this federal investment's leveraging even more private investment. And to show up, and when you're in a small town in particular, but even bigger towns, and you show up and here's 100 new jobs, 200 new jobs. And again, not just some of these are construction jobs, but there's an awful lot of these that are permanent jobs, long-term jobs going forward. And when you talk to the mayors and the others who've been literally in their communities their entire lives, and they've got this 100 new jobs that are coming online, they're almost giddy, so excited at what this means for their community and what they can do to help build out the future of that community, including for young people who want to stay in those communities going forward. So I think you're right, Josh, to focus on community by community, the impact of it. And we also track, of course, we're a bunch of data nerds at the Department of Energy. We track the overall numbers. And one of the most impressive numbers I've seen recently, we do an annual survey, very in-depth survey of all the energy jobs, clean energy jobs across the board in our country. We just released it a few weeks ago for what the 2023 numbers show. And what we saw is clean energy jobs increased at twice the rate in 2023 as every other job category in our country. And that's 2023 when these laws have only been in place at that point a year and a half. And so I have no doubt that 2024 numbers are going to be even more impressive, and we're going to be on that trajectory in a really, really impressive, powerful way. It's been estimated that we're going to need a million new electricians in our country just by 2030. Given EV chargers, given heat pumps, given the full range of electrification that's happening across the country and decarbonization at the same time. So it's just that the jobs piece of it, there's a reason the president and the vice president focus on it. We should be supporting first and foremost our fellow humans, our fellow Americans, and bettering their lives. And there's a way to do this at the same time that we save the planet for our fellow humans and their kids and grandkids as well. There's no reason we can't be smart enough to do both of those.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, that's exactly what Supercool is about. How do we bring down carbon and improve our modern life and our society and where civilization needs to go at the same time? And I think, as I've heard you mention, and of course what we know about the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, the legislation in place, this provides to the private market, to companies, entrepreneurs, a sense of stability, security. I know what's going to be in place for the next 10 years. So as this transition unfolds. And so my question to you is, you sit in this really exciting seat, you're Deputy Secretary number 2 at US DOE, you've been at International Energy Agency in a really interesting role. as Deputy Executive Director and UN Security Council. I have a couple of questions for you. It's like you've lived like many people's dream jobs time and time again. And you've been in your career for quite some time. I talk to a lot of people who maybe would be in your position in life who might not be feeling terribly optimistic about the future and where we're headed. I'm curious how you see the future and whether you're feeling optimistic.
Yeah, so let me just first say I've been super lucky in my career and really appreciate the different mentors I've had and bosses and others who've helped me along. I'm making it a point every time I travel to give a big check to community X, Y, and Z to have a new clean energy manufacturing facility or whatnot. I try to stop at the local community college or the local college and do a climate and clean energy career talk, just to share my own experiences, because I think we're going to succeed on climate change the more we have more entrepreneurs or lawyers or accountants or hard tech folks or social scientists or people who run for public office who are really driven and motivated by it. And I think those I've found who've had the most successful careers have been those who follow their curiosity and follow their passion. And I've found that, and I feel incredibly lucky that I've found that, and we just need to try to help others find their passions. And my hope is that there'll be a lot of us who find it in climate and clean energy going forward. I have, just like the rest of us who are focused on climate change, there are some days where it's just like, holy crap, this is really tough. We've got to move so quick and at such a scale, the pace of what we need to do. But then coming into work with a phenomenally talented group we've got here at the Department of Energy, including 1,000 new folks that we brought in our Clean Energy Corps, just motivates me. And especially getting out there in the community, getting out there talking to that local union guy in Arizona, meeting with local community leaders in Kentucky or West Virginia or others who are benefiting from this clean energy transition, and actually seeing it show up in the numbers, right? We are a very data-driven organization. To actually see that right now about 4% of our electricity is produced from solar energy in our country. In just 2-year period of time with the solar build-out that we're having, that number is going to go up to 7%. So we are seeing remarkable progress in a short amount of time. Is it fast enough? Is it at scale? Is it across all sectors? No, right? But we're getting the kind of momentum, we're getting the kind of traction that, frankly, I would have just dreamed about a few years ago.
Fantastic. I have to ask you before we say goodbye, have you decided who you're voting for?
I have decided. I have to say it was an incredibly easy decision.
Fantastic. Dave, thank you for spending some time with us today. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the work that you're doing, your service, and of course, for all Americans, we wish you continued success in your role.
Well, thank you, Josh, for all that you're doing, and I really appreciate you taking some time with me, and thank you for sharing your experiences and your passion with folks all across the world as well.